Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Marche. I'm the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and could not be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Oh, I lost my place. Many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are so thrilled to bring you today's educational event. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenters will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. We do have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. If you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it, go ahead and leave your contact information as well. We will make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. That is what we are here for. Well, I would love to introduce you to today's guests on our webinar today. John O'Bannon is a financial advisor with Diversified Financial Group, working closely with his clients and their CPA, attorney, and other professionals. John helps to design a prudent financial strategy specifically tailored for his clients, a client's family, or their business, assisting with retirement savings so you have more options when you retire, creating a strategy to pay for expected education expenses, and partnering with business owners in evaluating their business retirement plans and their transition strategies. This is what John does. John has enjoyed working with a variety of clients over the years, and he has made the most impact with small business owners, women post-divorced or widowed, professionals, and executives at local companies throughout the Midwest and across the nation. And we're so glad to have you here, John.
Thank you very much.
We're glad to have you here. Our other expert today is Annalee Kruger. She's the founder and president of CareRight Inc., the concierge of senior care planning. CareRight assists families in navigating the complexities associated with the aging process by managing crisis situations, developing a proactive aging plan, facilitating family meetings, and providing needed support to struggling caregivers. For Annalee, providing proactive senior care planning to families is more than just a career, it's her passion. Annalee has spent her entire career in the senior care industry and has become a nationally recognized expert in the field of senior care planning. Annalee is the author of The Invisible Patient, which outlines the emotional, physical, and financial toll experienced by family caregivers. Also, Annalee is the founder of Care Crusade, a national campaign for family members with loved ones in healthcare facilities to improve the quality of care. And we're so glad to have you both here. And I'm going to go ahead and let Annalee kick off our presentation.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. So we're going to talk today about just caregiving, the prevalence of caregiving and aging planning, and what happens, what do we need to be thinking about before, as someone is aging, before they pass away. And then John's going to talk a lot about what happens after the passing away. So we're going to talk about the prevalence of caregiving. We know that 23% of adults ages 45 to 64 years old take care of an aging adult. 58% of those adult children find themselves thrust into the role of family caregiving without ever having any kind of family meeting or discussion. And as you can imagine, even though in my bio it talks about proactive aging plans, you can imagine that actually most of my clients, 92% of my clients, come to me in crisis mode. Like, mom fell, she broke her hip, she's the caregiver for dad with dementia. What are we supposed to do? Because now mom's in the hospital and dad isn't safe at home. So what are we supposed to do? So just know that you are never alone in this whole caregiving journey. We'll talk more about what caregiving really looks like and that kind of caregiver snowball. When we talk about the caregiver snowball, I want to talk about how that ties in with an aging plan. When family caregivers, like that slide said, 58% of family caregivers adult children end up thrust into the role of family caregiving. It could be that crisis call that you get at 2 o'clock in the morning that dad fell or mom had a stroke, or the police department is calling you because your demented father is lost and he's driving on the highway. It could be a lot of those types of crisis calls. The caregiver snowball effect is when you start doing little things for your parents and it seems manageable and sustainable at first, like, oh, sure, I can swing by and pick up your mail, or of course I can stop by the grocery store and bring you, food and toilet paper and those kind of things. And yes, I can stop by the pharmacy, because you're out doing your own errands as well. But then pretty soon you start finding that you might have to come over on the weekends and do laundry and housekeeping. And pretty soon you might realize, oh, dad's not able to take care of his bills anymore because he's got stacks of mail piled up. That's a good sign that he's not able to manage his mail anymore. So you start taking over some of the bill pay. And then pretty soon you realize, oh, dad's not being really forthright when he goes to these doctor's appointments. You don't know what's being talked about. And so then you start taking time off work to start going to a doctor's appointment. One doctor's appointment, if you've been in this role before, you know that one doctor's appointment can take an entire day. And why is that? Because if you have to go over to their house, get them ready for breakfast, get them toileted, get them dressed, give them their medications, then get your parents into the car, and then the doctor's appointment. With the pandemic, a lot of appointments are taking 1 to 2 hours of a wait time in the waiting room just before you can even get seen. Then if the doctor changes the medication orders, then you have to go to the pharmacy, pick up the new prescription, get mom some lunch, and then you need to get mom or dad home and refill their medication containers with a new prescription. And so it can be a long day. And so the caregiver snowball, it starts out little, but then the next thing you know, it's can be a full-time job if you have a very frail elderly loved one or two aging parents that you're trying to manage. So that's why it's important that we talk about what is an actual aging plan. We don't want adult children to end up getting burned out and frustrated. We know that will impact your relationships with your parents. We know that will impact your relationships with your siblings. And why is that? Because oftentimes the role of primary caregiver falls on the shoulders of the local son or the local daughter, and it can be stressful. We also know that if families don't start talking about the what ifs of aging, they will find themselves in a crisis. Yes, you are absolutely right. If they are on oxygen and need tanks transported as well, or if they're in a wheelchair and you have to get them in and out of the wheelchair and put the wheelchair in and out of the car, that's exactly right. So we had someone mention something in the chat box. And speaking of wheelchairs and oxygen concentrators and transporters like that, if you're 60 or 70 years old and you're trying to take care of your 95-year-old mother, maybe your back isn't the best and you're trying to lug this big wheelchair in and out of the trunk. So that caregiving role can happen pretty quickly, and you can pretty much find yourself in over your head very quickly. So we talk about what is an aging plan. It's when we facilitate the family meetings. We know that sometimes families try to have their own family meeting, but there's oftentimes too much emotional junk that gets brought up when families try to facilitate their own family meeting. We know that there's blended families, and sometimes it's crisis time is when the kids actually all have to communicate together, and this might be their first time of communicating. We also know that as families started moving away from each other, if they didn't invest the time, the energy, and the effort in maintaining relationships with each other, it's hard for them to then pick up where they left off, right? So I've had clients that never talked to each other for 20 years because Tom said something stupid at Thanksgiving and that made Sally mad. So now, of course, mom fell and she broke her hip, and now they're kind of forced into having to come together and work as a team. So we know families, when they sometimes try to have these family meetings on their own, it's not always very successful. The other thing is you probably don't even know what to talk about. There's no roadmap. In your mind, there might not be a roadmap, but that's what the aging plan is. So we talk about as a family, and it's a neutral third party person, it's me facilitating these family meetings. We talk about the what ifs of aging. Where will you live as you age? So if you live in Tucson, Arizona, but your 4 kids live in 4 different states up north, and you need more help and care and oversight and patient advocacy, are you expecting your kids to fly back and forth every time there's a fall or a hospitalization or something that happens? So where does it make sense for you to live now? And how can we help you be supported properly at home now? But where does it make sense for you to live long-term, when in time you're going to need more care, oversight, and advocacy as you enter the healthcare industry? So who will provide the care? Are you going to bring in home care? And if so, how is care going to get paid? So do you have a long-term care insurance policy? Do you have a life insurance hybrid policy? Like how did you plan to pay for the care that you're going to need at some point? When I ask my aging parents, my clients that are the moms and the dads, I always ask them, what are your goals as you age? And it's the same 2 responses every single time. I want to stay in my home as long as possible. And in the next breath, it's, but I don't want to be a burden on my kids. But guess who is calling me for an aging plan? It's the adult children, because they are being burdened, and they feel guilty about saying that, but they are feeling burdened, and they are often the moms and dads assisted living. They are the reason that their parents have been able to stay at home so long, but because they don't have an actual comprehensive plan on where are we going to live when this is no longer feasible, that's when that resentment starts settling in. So does it make sense to potentially move closer to where your kids are? And if so, if your kids live scattered across the country, which child does it make sense to maybe move closer to? Who's got the time, the energy, the finances that can be away from work? Who's got the supportive spouse who won't mind that you're gone for a while to oversee your parents' care? So that's what we talk about in that family meeting, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. What are your parents' expectations of you? Have you ever asked your parents, as you get older, let's talk this out, or let's play this out. Say you need more and more care, getting to the bathroom or getting to your doctor's appointments or coordinating your care. What do you expect of me as a child? That can be a powerful question. It can also be a dangerous question. Dangerous in that, like, if you're a nurse, they'll say, well, you're a nurse, so you'll have to be the one to take care of us as we age. Or say you're the attorney of the family, well, you'll have to take all of our legal affairs, or you're the financial planner of the family, you'll have to take care of all the finances. So it's helpful to just kind of have an idea of what do your parents expect of you? But the other question is, what type of relationship do you have with your family? Maybe your parents weren't, in your mind, the best parents that you could have had, and the relationship's not very good. And so now there's a medical crisis. Who's going to step in and help the parents if the relationships are that fractured? So we talk a lot about family dynamics. What if a medical crisis occurs? How prepared are you? What conversations have you had as a family about the what ifs? If there's a broken hip, if there's a hospitalization, if we as kids see that you're not doing as well at home, you're starting to lose weight, you're missing doctor's appointments, you're not taking care of the house properly, you're not bathing. Will you allow us to step in and help you, or at least get some home care, companion care in here? When we talk about aging in place at home, I want to bring up a couple of ideas, or a couple of comments, I guess. When I talk about my clients say, well, they want to age in place at home, most people do. Most seniors do want to stay at home. But the reality is sometimes that's not very safe, or they become a self-neglect case because they aren't taking good care of themselves. They're not getting to their doctor's appointments. They're not eating properly. I was in a home the other day, a family member's home the other day, and he still had food like milk and lunch meat from 3 months ago in his refrigerator, and he wouldn't let his son dump it. So, you know, those are things those are indications that staying at home is not safe to do by himself. He needs more supports in there. So then the problem is, okay, you as adult children can identify that there's problems going on at the house, but what if mom and dad don't want us to intervene, or they keep firing the home care company? So aging in place at home can happen as long as your parents are cooperative with that idea of having home care come in. Being tolerant of, if your goal is to stay at home, it's going to be costly, but you also are going to have a lot of traffic in and out of your home. If there's a 12-hour shift that needs to be covered by the companion and they call in sick, that home care company, it might take 2 or 3 companions that they have to have come in just to fill that 12-hour shift. So you have 2 or 3 more people that you don't know coming into your home to help take care of you. And that's one of the biggest complaints that my clients who have chosen to stay at home, they complain about that all of the time. There's too much traffic in the home. They always have to train the new caregivers. Sometimes the caregivers don't speak the language that your parents speak. I'm in the southern states here, and a lot of these caregivers are doing their shifts by using an English translation app. So again, if the goal is to stay at home, that's fine, but you have to be pretty tolerant and kind of keep your expectations in check, so to speak. So that's just a little bit about the aging in place at home and kind of what to think about for that. The importance of the aging plan, and that's why it's important to put a plan together, is so you can make informed decisions, but it also reduces the stress of always waiting for when is that crisis call going to happen again. We put a plan in place when the crisis occurs, but obviously the goal is to reach families proactively and say, look, if you're starting to see weight loss, you're starting to see memory impairment, you're starting to see depression, your parents are missing their doctor's appointments. When you start seeing that things are not going well, that's your cue that, hey, we need to be putting a plan together. Because I can tell you that their conditions can change very quickly. One fall, one stroke, one urinary tract infection, and that whole staying at home can change. We also know that obviously putting an aging plan in place, it avoids caregiver burnout. Caregiving to your aging parents can be a pleasant experience for all of you if you have enough supports in place, if you actually communicate effectively as a family. So it can be a positive experience, but unfortunately there's so many families out there that they don't think about putting a plan together, or they're just in so much denial that they aren't realizing really how not great their parents are doing. It also, as far as the planning mechanism goes, it obviously gives you peace of mind. It's kind of like an insurance policy. Here's the plan. If we ever need to activate it, we know which home care companies we're going to use. We know what type of care community mom or dad qualifies for. And that way you've got that as a backup plan if you should ever need it. Common mistakes. So when families come to me, they've unfortunately made a lot of mistakes because you don't know what you don't know, right? You find yourselves in uncharted territory, and you're doing the best you can. If you're a family caregiver and you're flying back and forth or driving back and forth all of the time, and you're trying to manage your career, your own family, your own health, it gets to be to the point where you become in survival mode, just trying to get through the day. We see families who've really not had any type of family meeting about the what ifs. And then those adult kids end up thrust into the role of family caregiving, and it quickly becomes overwhelming, and it quickly becomes a resentful type of situation. We see where families don't have their affairs in order. They don't have their accounts, their passwords, their estate documents. They don't have their insurance policies. They don't have a list of their professionals that they work with, like the CPA, their financial planner, the insurance representative, or the insurance salesman. They don't have all of that information laid out for the family, let alone communicated with a family. So we help families with our grab and go binder. It helps families get all of their documents organized. And then each heading of the binder is an agenda item. So if you want to facilitate your own family meeting as far as what you already have in place, you can say, okay, kids, here's what we have for insurance, and here's where you can find the bank box key, and here's the banks that we use, and here's the accounts that come out, or here's the bills that come out of each account. Here's our professionals that we work with. And hopefully you already know some of your parents' professionals so that you can work collaboratively as a team if there's ever a need to. So that's one mistake, is families not having everything laid out and communicated with their kids. A lack of understanding about dementia and just typical aging. That's why I brought up the whole example of one doctor appointment can take the entire day, because I've had so many adult kids say, I can't believe one appointment has taken an entire day. It does. And the more frail and elderly and dependent your parents become, the longer caregiving is going to just continually snowball. I can always tell when a family says, well, if mom's dementia progresses, that we really need to spend a lot of time during that aging planning process and those family meetings on educating the families about what dementia really looks like and what kind of journey that they're in. With dementia, it is a progressive disease. Their brain is shrinking. So you will see changes in your loved one's mood, behavior, personality, safe decision-making, and care needs. So that's one mistake I see families make, is not really understanding or researching what their loved one actually has, and not understanding care options. What care options are in mom and dad's area? Is there an adult daycare program? Are there home care companies? Can we get on the home care companies just in case waiting list, so that if there's a medical crisis, you already have your parents' profile set up and the credit cards on file, because then that will speed up the process. With the pandemic, you all probably can understand how short-staffed most of these places are. And so the more care that you need to get on these waiting lists of these home care companies, for those home care companies that have a waiting list. Families blindsided by how poorly their parents are doing at home, and essentially being a self-neglect case. This is unfortunately where a lot of my clients, when they come on for services, that's kind of the condition that they're in. The adult children maybe haven't realized how poorly their parents are doing at home, or coming out of the pandemic when no one could visit each other and travel. I've had literally hundreds of families just be totally blindsided how much weight their parents lost, how much their dementia progressed, that they haven't been taking their pills, or they didn't know to call the doctor to get their prescriptions renewed. So they're usually kind of a mess when they come to CareRight for an aging plan. So that's why I say, just be mindful when you are visiting your parents or talking to them on the phone, or doing like a video conference like this with your parents. Look for signs that things aren't going well. Do they look like they've lost weight? Are they up to date on their doctor's appointments? You know, that you can have them carry you around on the computer or on the phone and see if there's things in disarray, or if your parents don't look like they're showered and properly taken care of. Those should be your red flags. And if they start repeating themselves on the call, that's an indication that maybe there's some memory issues or some depression happening. So those are some things to look at.
Fantastic. So thank you, Annalie. That was kind of a good setup for the whole thing of, well, man, there's a lot on your plate. And I think both Annalie and myself, as the financial person that I help with a lot of families, whether you call Annalie or you call someone like myself, typically the call is like the feeling that you're in this alone, or that it's all been landed on you. And whether you have family members or not, that are around to support and to help with drive-by with food and so on for mom or dad, it still lands in your lap as a majority. And I guess the biggest thing that I will start with is lean on the professionals that are either in your life or that are in your mom and dad's or the loved one's life, that they should absolutely be doing heavy lifting on your behalf. And so if we look at the next slide, it's really more of a statistics. I'm going to be the numbers guy, and this will be the only numbers I show you. But I think it's a bigger number that people realize, that those that are 75 and older, getting into those early 70s, those numbers of folks that, the greatest generation is really starting to medically and physically, those numbers are starting to shrink. And I think in a bigger number than people realize, both as an individual, but also as we hear. I mean, that's almost 20% of our population every year is being affected by this. And if you're in that next generation of 50 to 60, then you're being asked to care for that older generation at a greater rate, mainly because every generation is aging longer. But as we do that, we also are requiring more care as we age. And that's not something that's, I think, earth shattering, but it is something that I think at the age of 30, we probably weren't necessarily paying attention to. And then if we take a real hard look at ourselves, even, are we asking those same questions about ourselves and our loved ones and husbands and wives and so on? And so this whole area of conversation, if you look, just continue down that the bar chart there, these numbers don't get smaller, and year over year they continue to grow. So this isn't meant to be a negative by any means. Rather, on the flip side, know that you're not alone, and this is a growing majority. As Annalie mentioned before, almost 60% of America are in some way or another of this adult generation. We are taking care of the generation that's above us, that took care of us our whole lives. And so now the roles are flipping. And quite honestly, a lot of that's because every generation's living longer. So in the next slide, really, it goes to lean on the folks that you typically probably only saw the professionals doing a very limited amount of work or of expertise. And as a financial advisor, my first step with a lot of folks, that when we start talking about kind of what Annalie is starting to say is, well, if you're going to hair or healthcare facilities, or if it's assisted living, or if it now you have these health care facilities that are multiple stages, the question is, well, when do you want to start that conversation of whether that's for you or for your loved one? At what stage do you enter those facilities, and how do you pay for those things? And typically that's how I get brought into the conversation of, well, either mom and dad did or didn't save enough, or they do or they don't have long-term care, which statistically that number of long-term care is actually in the single digits as to whether or not that's part of people's overall financial plan. Again, not good or bad. That's just statistical numbers. So when we have a conversation in my office, it's really, I have no idea. I have no idea if this is possible, or mom and dad more than me. And I'm talking to you because your name is, on the monthly statement. So catch me up. Again, not uncommon. It's not surprising, but it is something that I would recommend to you. No matter where you are in the care conversation, absolutely have it sooner than later. And the financial advisor should take a lot of those roles off of your plate. How are you going to pay for long-term care? Or your monthly cost is going to be X, 5,000, 7,000, 9,000 a month. And that a lot of that relies on how much assisted help or medications are required, or quite honestly, the level of the facility that you choose. And is it newer? Is it older? Is it, are there benefits from the military, or is Social Security going to help? All of those things. And then when you start talking about taxes on the backside, when you go to use dollars to pay for these things, how does that affect the tax bill in March and April? Holy buckets. That is so much for people to be thrust into. And unfortunately, sometimes you stumble along that until those times of the year actually start to flip on the calendar. And then you're like, oh man, now I'm really in a place that maybe I didn't foresee. And that's okay. But that is what the professionals are for. So that's why I say I work with the CPAs and the lawyers. And I think your financial person, whether it's yours or for the ones that are for your loved ones, should have that relationship and open conversation with the other professionals, so that you don't have to be the conduit always. There should be the conversation on the backside that maybe they foresee the blind spot or the challenge, whether it's tax related or the estate planning, and they are able to bring you solutions that you didn't even know that there was a potential problem. So go ahead to the next slide. When I start with, go ahead and go to the next slide, sorry. When we talk about whether it's before or after death, whether you're in the planning stages or you've been now given somewhat the dubious responsibility of being the executor, there's a lot of conversations that really should start with a cup of coffee and everybody that's involved. And if you're fortunate enough to do this when the loved ones, mom and dad, are still around, then the first conversation is, mom, dad, have you had any of these conversations with your advisor or your lawyer? Or maybe you had one with my sister and I just wasn't aware. Also, what roles do we all legally have? If you're the executor of the will, right, in your planning stages, what does that really mean? And more than that, do all of the other beneficiaries understand what the role of the executor is legally? It's not to make any decisions whatsoever based on the will, or, if there's an estate plan and there's trustees and things like that. A lot of that is legally predetermined. And the idea of having a cup of coffee with everyone in the room is to really de-escalate any sort of assumptions or any sort of judgment that might be going on in the family just because, well, as Americans, we all like to be in control. And so when somebody else is deemed control and I was never asked, I immediately look at that, and they could be my best brother, right? Or the best friend. And you can't not feel, well, are they doing it right? Did they miss something? Am I not getting what I should? Well, what about this conversation I had, with Dad 3 years ago? Do they know about that? All of those things are absolutely legitimate to ask. And it all starts with the most informal conversation possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but that's where I like to start as a professional, getting everyone in the room. And then I'm the bad guy. Mom and dad is not, right? Because maybe they made decisions 10 years ago in their will that may or may not be appropriate today because life changes and families change, but that's the way it is legally. So to have this conversation with mom and dad now, even if they've got a will or the estate is good or the lawyer, if at a minimum, the lawyer and the financial person should at least be made aware, if they're not, that mom and dad are now progressing to a stage that maybe they don't have the mental or the physical capability that they had the last time things were written down. Simple question to that professional: are things in a way that maybe we should at least go through them and verify with mom and dad why they still can have a valid say, and they can still understand what's being asked, and potentially can understand 10 years ago why they made a decision. That's where, of course, the executor only typically is involved in that, conversation. But it at least allows, if there needs to be a more broad conversation with more family, or maybe it's they're really philanthropic in the way that they think, and are the current organizations that they were going to align with, are they still currently aligned? A lot of this is in certainly the planning for care, but it's also looking ahead and saying all of these things that mom and dad spent 70 years planning, are they still on track? By no means do I mean to add more on your list of things to do to care. And I say this with all honesty, as I'm being asked to do the same for my own mom at this point. It's more to say, hey, mom and dad, this isn't just, I want to take care of you and make sure that you're pain-free, or, the next steps are taken care of. It's more, mom and dad, let's talk about all of these things. And I genuinely want to understand what your goals are, because when you get to the point where you can no longer make those decisions for yourself, mom, dad, I want to make sure that I do them the way that you want them to be done. And if I have to involve the sister or the aunt that might be in it, or whatever, that we all are having this conversation in a way that's the way it should be, and it's focused on you. And then you can also know that as you struggle with your physical limitations and the mental limitations that are coming, that you can at least feel like all of these plans are taken care of. And then we worry about you. That is what a financial person should be for you and your family. If that person is not that way, or you don't get that vibe because mom and dad always used some person and you don't feel that connection, it's also okay to bring in another voice that might be more compassionate, or they also might be more broad in their knowledge. Not every financial advisor likes to get into the insurance or gets into certain types of, anything more than just worrying about your portfolio. That's not bad. It's just not everyone does everything. So if that's the case, absolutely ask the questions that you find value in your financial person. So the additional things to ask of who is what role, and if they have a will, this gets into some technical stuff, but is it testamentary or is it contractual, or is there an estate? And if mom and dad are still listed as the trustees, as they may or may not be expected, I don't know your individual situation, but if they are going to potentially lose mental capacity, is it beneficial to maybe take them off as trustees and you become the trustee, so that now legally you can make decisions to either pay the bills or move assets, again, as they want, but we're taking care of some of those legal paperwork, red tape situations before they become really sticky. And it starts with a conversation of not only identifying, is that the situation, but also, mom and dad, are you okay with making some of those big changes? And if it's not me, let's ask the sister or somebody else that you trust to step in. Because again, a lot of times these decisions were made 15 years ago. Families change, life changes. So when you start talking about all the planning, the medical emergency is oftentimes a great way to open up the door, although sometimes the conversations are really hard. I have yet to have a conversation that was really hard, that on the aftermath of having it, a single person wasn't happy that they had it. And that every time includes mom and dad. Everyone sleeps better. Are there questions afterward? Absolutely. But your financial person should also be helping to answer those for you. Bring in the long-term care or the financial statements for life insurance, or let that person who deals with that verbiage every single day sort through it on your behalf. And the daily dollar allotment that is required for healthcare, is that payable from the long-term care, or will the pension take for that, or will Social Security help with that? If the financial person isn't the exact person to give you that answer, the financial person should know who does. Again, saving you phone calls, saving you time, because in the end, worrying about whether it's mom, dad, or the friend that needs the medical assistance today, that should be your biggest concern. So I'll stop there, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but really hopefully asking the right questions about the will, about the long-term plans, about asking about who has what roles legally, and if necessary, defining those with all of the beneficiaries, even on the planning side of things, while you're planning for healthcare and so on. Identifying these now makes the road ahead so much easier. And unfortunately, if you're beyond all of this, and now we're talking about beneficiaries and estates, and that's your current status, this somewhat gets expedited, but at the same time, it's a lot of the same questions. The unfortunate part is, unfortunately, you can't ask mom and dad anymore, but the roles are the same. So paying for all of these things and how they would be paid, sometimes you can get like an estate plans, you get pretty complex layers of A is paying for B, and B eventually will pay for a tax-free transfer of money, to the estate, so it just depends upon everyone's individual plan. But that's why I ask for that financial advisor. And if you don't get the vibe right away, that person wants to help, or maybe has the ability, that's okay. Find someone that does.
I
So I'll
have a
turn that
couple,
back into the healthcare, and you bet asking for questions if there are any.
we do have some questions here and a couple of comments first. One participant said that even if a parent says they have legal documents in place, you should review them. For example, the lawyer sent my parent a final printed power of attorney for healthcare, and every choice was blank. They had failed to input the parent's choices into the computer. I know Annalee had a couple comments that she put in the chat, but maybe you want to voice them here, Annalee.
Yeah, so that's, it's disheartening, but it's not surprising that that happens. And I hate to say this, but it's the same in healthcare. Is you have to, as consumers or family members, unfortunately, we have to double check to make sure that things are in place properly. And that's one of the things that's helpful with that grab and go binder that we use with our clients, because it makes you have to look at your documents as you're putting them in the binder or as you're uploading them into your grab and go binder e-file. It kind of makes you look through everything so that you do have everything in order, or that wishes that were documented 20 years ago. You know, is that person that your parents named as a power of attorney 20 years ago, do they still have a trusting relationship? Is that person still living? When we help our clients, sometimes the people that they named as a power of attorney 25 years ago now has dementia or is dead or lives out of state and is in poor health. And so it's helpful when you know you're working with the right professionals, when we go deep, like when we look at, make sure that everything is buttoned up and bring in the professionals that need to. We often do a financial, what I call, because again, I come from the healthcare industry, so everything has care in it. But we often have to do a financial care conference or a legal care conference and bring in the financial planner if they're open to it. Sometimes they're not, or the attorney if they're open to it, just because all of the professionals, we all need to be working on the same page with the same goals based on what your goals are, because we all bring a different expertise to what's going to help you with that aging plan. So yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you and your family, that the fields in the power of attorney documents or in the legal documents weren't filled in.
One other comment as well here about having not only trustees, but also successor trustees in case the trustee, I think John was also mentioning that as well.
Absolutely. And that's, again, everyone's estate plan. I mean, it's such a broad word, but it really is that. But hopefully this also makes you ask questions about your own. And one thing that is kind of a complicated situation that if is now becoming the case, where again, the 50 to 70s generation that is now taking care of the older generation, if you are being relied upon financially, or even as a medical, medically voice of decision making, that should also be affected into your own estate plan if something unfortunate or horrible would be to happen to you. And who would you want to be in your stead to take care of mom or dad, or if financially you're paying a certain amount of dollars, or you are taking care of the financial just bill paying month to month, who does that in if things were to go sideways, right? And that's typically doesn't happen very often, but I have seen it. And it's just, again, a question to ask if you can, mom or dad, or in your own estate plan, if you're using your financial, assets, how do those continue to either be liquidated or be used? Because sometimes it changes a little bit when one spouse passes away who was helping mom and dad. And you hate to say this, it just changes the dynamics So then the other siblings are like, I don't know, what do we do? Right. So something to also think again for those that have a bit more means that are also helping mom and dad. A little introspection will help as well.
I do have a question here. Are there laws that govern when an older person isn't safe to live by themselves? Does the state intervene at any point?
Do you want to answer, Annalie? I mean,
Yeah.
I know from a insurance perspective, but go ahead.
Yeah, so sometimes when we talk about self-neglect, like I talked about at the part of my presentation, people that are really concerned about their parent or a neighbor that's concerned about an elderly loved one, they'll call the police to do safety wellness checks, for example, or they'll call the county to have an assessment done to see if this person is safe at home. Doctors also are involved, obviously, to make sure that the person still has, making good decisions, or if maybe they need to just have their medications adjusted, or they're dehydrated and they're not making good decisions because they're dehydrated. So a full medical workup is really helpful. And also if there's concern about capacity, that's a legal term. So you have to go through the attorney for determining capacity, and that's a whole court thing and court costs and stuff like that. But there's, in each state is a little bit different. Some of these things vary by county as well.
So to add on to that, or to piggyback, I know the insurance industry evaluates everyone by 6 functions you can or can't do physically, to whether it's also, you'll find, will determine whether or not you can or cannot have assisted living, or you can turn on your long-term care insurance. And so to your point of whether or not legally you can force them into care, there might be a way to maybe switch that conversation a little bit in the phrasing that medically you can or can't do these things, mom or dad. So therefore, maybe the concern would be then, so financially we could take care of care because you meet these requirements. And so if we're trying to help someone into care, if I were to kind of read between the lines there, there might be a different perspective to take that conversation. And it is very clear, and there is legal definitions for that. Now, getting that person to be forced out of their home or whatever, that's a whole nother thing altogether. But maybe making the suggestion that there is an opportunity that has also been answered, that might help move that the person that needs the help, that they don't see themselves as a burden, not only to you or financially. So sometimes that phrasing might help, but if you're looking for help in that conversation, maybe the medical industry can provide that in that way.
I have another question here. What kind of costs of caregiving or a facility like an assisted living is covered by Medicare? There's some misunderstanding about that. I know that's pretty common.
Yeah, that's a common misunderstanding. So Medicare is an insurance, so it does not pay for what a lot of people assume that it will. So then they don't plan properly or plan as well as they could have, because they assume Medicare or some other payer source is going to cover the cost of assisted living. So when you're talking about Medicare only covers, like if you or your loved one has had a qualifying hospital stay and you need to go into like a rehab center, but you or your loved one still has to meet the therapy criteria and show progress. So say mom falls, she breaks her hip, she goes to the hospital, has her qualifying stay, and that she's actually admitted and not on observation status, because that's a huge difference. So that's a whole nother webinar, but make sure she's actually admitted. And then Medicare will, if she needs to go into a skilled rehab center, will pay 100% of that skilled rehab fee and her medications, as long as she's showing progress with working with therapy and she's meeting her goals or exceeding her goals and she's cooperative. So every week, the therapists submit their progress notes into the insurance company, and then the insurance company yays or nays it, like, yep, Ethel can be renewed for another week. But they're not going to, Medicare is not going to pay long-term. So as soon as she meets her goals, or on the worst case scenario, she plateaus and she's as far as she's going to be able to get with therapy, then Medicare stops paying. And then you need to figure out, okay, so if mom can't go back home, then does she need to go into like an assisted living center, and that's paid out of pocket. So depending on where you live, because this is what we do with the aging plan, is we help you figure out what are your actual viable care options. So depending on where you live across the country, home, assisted living can range anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 per month, depending on what level of care you need and how much assistance that you need. And that's paid out of pocket. Or if you have long-term care insurance with a rider in there, that it'll cover more than just nursing home insurance or home care. So if there's long-term care insurance, you really need to be familiar with that policy to see what it'll actually cover. So assisted living is paid out of pocket unless you have some sort of insurance coverage or can leverage like the VA benefits. So just know that Medicare is not a long-term care insurance policy.
John, can you speak to that a little bit too?
Yeah, I mean, really, she kind of covered that really, really well. It's, there's always the back and forth of who pays and how that gets paid. A lot of it, as she kind of alluded to, and I think the very loose medical terms that we deal with when we're trying to help someone seek care, we don't know how those translate to the definitions that insurance uses, whether that's Medicare, Medicaid, or whatever healthcare additional sometimes insurance they may have, or if you're working with the VA, or if they have long-term care. That is where asking someone, as you being the advocate for someone you love, sometimes the folks at the care facility will help you to better define where you really are in the care, as well as how that lines up with how it gets paid. They might not be able to give you a number of what's going to get covered. Rarely that's can they do that for obvious reasons? But they can certainly say, we haven't fully admitted mom. She's under observation. Okay, so then that means you can go and ask whatever care provider or the insurance is, this is where she at. What does she need to be in order for you to receive 100% coverage or 50% coverage or whatever that might be? Additionally, are there any limits to either dollar wise or length of stay that I need to be aware of as the caregiver, so that I can be thinking ahead of the current situation? And if the doctor or care facility is recommending X, how does that look 3 months from now? Because I want to know my options when I go back to the doctor and the care facility, and I want to hopefully help work my loved one to an area where the financial cost is going to be covered the greatest. And if it's not, I just want to be aware, so that then I can go back to the financial guy and say, I'm going to need $4,000 next month. Right. And you can start to plan. Right. And that means liquidating assets or whatever that might mean. But it's a lot less stressful if you're able to ask those questions before you get to that point. Unfortunately, you're probably going to get a very high level of education of medical real quick, but use people like Annalie and myself who have done this a lot and ask us those questions, because inevitably we'll be able to help steer you.
Well, I really appreciate both of you for being here. I know that these questions have been very good. We had some comments we weren't able to get to, and I want to thank everyone. If you do have more questions, go ahead and leave that in the chat. I'll make sure to save that, and we can address those afterwards if you have any other questions you want us to address. On behalf of Advice Chaser, thank you so much, the organizations that have worked with us to bring you this webinar today. Look for an email soon for a link to the replay of this event. You're welcome to share that replay with friends or family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we will see you at a webinar very soon again someday. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Annalie.
You bet. Thanks, Marche.